second time in a week, rainbow umbrellas were deployed in an effort to shield children from hate at a Washington, D.C. area drag queen story hour. This time, Proud Boys members targeted Crazy Aunt Helen's, an LGBTQ+ eatery. Joining me now is the Advocate's senior national reporter, Christopher Wiggins. Christopher, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, there have been recent incidents in the greater DC area where the LGBTQ+ community has teamed with area residents to protect those attending Drag Queen Story Hour. What can you tell us about how these communities came together outside Crazy Aunt Helen's?
So this weekend, on Saturday morning, about 200 or so rainbow umbrella-clad people showed up outside of Crazy Aunt Helen's on 8th Street in Capitol Hill in D.C. to shield kids from potentially seeing Proud Boys or other detractors spew hateful rhetoric and make ugly faces at them. And, it turned out that in conjunction with the Parasol Patrol, which is a group that organizes these kinds of interventions, the DC police also became pretty engaged through the LGBTQ liaison unit, which advised the police department that there was a threat against this event. And so they actually shut down the streets and provided a pretty reasonable police response.
Wow, well, that's good to hear. There was another incident at the library in Olney near DC, and can you tell us what happened there, please?
Yeah, so the next day, excuse me, the next day in Olney, Maryland, which is just about 20 miles north of Washington, D.C., there were detractors who targeted the only library that was hosting a drag queen story hour in support of a production of the Broadway musical Kinky Boots. And so there was a group of detractors that showed up there, and they were also met with uh, people there who had umbrellas that presented a rainbow wall against the people who were protesting. And there was a lot of video actually online that showed how some of these right wing individuals holding signs tried to claim that their First Amendment rights were being infringed upon by not being allowed to access the building. Although, obviously, since we know about the fact that they were upset and that they were held signs, their First Amendment rights were clearly kept intact.
Right. Thank you for that. Well, the Parasol Patrol is becoming increasingly integral to creating safe spaces for those who wish to attend Drag Queen Story Hour events and not have to deal with these far right extremists. And would you tell us a bit about the history of Parasol Patrol?
So Parasol Patrol was born out of similar to back when the Westboro Baptist Church was protesting things like funerals for LGBTQ people, and also then later on for certain veterans. There were people wearing large angel wings that would obscure the view of those grieving from detractors. And so, in that same vein, as the drag queen story hours became targets by right wing agitators and opportunists over recent years, this group has formed to provide safe spaces for young people who attend LGBTQ friendly events. And they also provide headphones for little children who may be part of protests with their parents or events where they're supporting rallies, and where they would be wearing headphones in order to not hear some of the negative things that are spewed when some people are just trying to live their lives.
Yeah, I appreciate that history because it has such a deep meaning in the LGBTQ plus community. I remember the angels at Matthew Shepard's funeral. Uh,
Yes.
you mentioned video a little bit. I want to go deeper into that. Video coverage has proven to be critical in showing that the Parasol Patrol works peacefully. What can you say about how LGBTQ plus people and allies are using video as a form of protection?
So, much like we've seen in recent years when Black communities have documented attacks against unarmed Black men and women and shown police violence to have been perpetrated against them, So too are LGBTQ communities documenting when there are people who wish to do them harm, who make themselves known at events that support the LGBTQ community. Some of the video showed, for example, someone who claimed to be a former police officer flash a badge at the only library, only to then be turned away and mocked by several people who followed him and escorted him off the property for having shown what he said was a retired police badge. And there's a database of people who use publicly available open source intelligence to keep records of people who show up at these events and either uh, hold signs that are in some way demeaning to the community, or those who make overt threats.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. And, as we've mentioned, protests of Drag Queen Story Hour and even the local production of the Cyndi Lauper musical Kinky Boots have amped up. How are these protests connected or aligned with far-right politicians and a deluge of anti-LGBTQ plus legislation that has cropped up over the past 2 years?
So all of the negativity towards drag queens or the trans community or the LGBTQ community as large is based out of some opportunism that has occurred among right-wing politicians who, feed off of a pipeline of misinformation from right-wing influencers like Kaya Rychik of Libs of TikTok, who targeted the Kiki Boots event and somehow made it seem as though because the word kinky is in the title that there was some sort of sexual component to this widely renowned Broadway show that has nothing to do with any sort of sex, but instead deals with the unlikely partnership of a shoe factory owner and a drag queen who essentially saves the business because of the designs of some of her tiki boots. So, it's really quite ridiculous, some of the things that are occurring here. But, if you, sometimes you have to laugh, but this all have serious repercussions because there are now, for example, in Tennessee, a bill has passed that essentially bans all drag performances. So, Republicans really are amping up the culture wars and influencers, like I said, like Kaya Rychek of Libs of TikTok, aren't helping the situation. In fact, they're hurting it while also benefiting off of it financially.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. Christopher Wiggins, thank you for keeping on top of this very important issue. Christopher Wiggins, advocate, senior national reporter, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
February is Black History Month, and today we want to celebrate Mildred Hemmons Carter, who was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. She graduated from Tuskegee with a BA in business, but also earned her private pilot's license in 1941. Because of the time period, Mildred couldn't fly military airplanes, but was the first civilian hired by the Army Air Corps. She cleared the way for airmen by bulldozing trees off of an airstrip site. At Tuskegee, she helped rig parachutes, equipped the base, and worked at the Tuskegee Army Airfield throughout the war. Still, her application to become a WASP, which stands for Women's Air Force Service Pilots, was denied because of her race. That's all the time we have for this Advocate today. The Advocate channel is streaming online at advocatechannel.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel or download our Roku app. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist. I'll see you next time.